I still remember the sound of my own front door closing behind me. The house I'd spent 32 years paying for, the place where my wife and I raised our son, suddenly wasn't mine anymore. My son stood on the porch with his arms crossed while two movers carried my last box to the sidewalk. He didn't even look ashamed. He looked relieved. If you've ever wondered how someone can lose everything to their own child, stay with me until the end. And if stories about family betrayal remind you that trust has to be earned, I'd appreciate you subscribing to Family Betrayal. Also, the faces, photos, and scenes you see in this video are simply visual illustrations to help tell this story. I kept asking myself the same question. Where had I failed? How had the little boy I once carried on my shoulders become the man who was watching me lose my home without blinking? He smiled and said, "Dad, you signed the papers. It's legally mine now." Those words hit harder than any punch. 3 months earlier, I thought I was helping him through a difficult divorce. He claimed creditors were coming after him and begged me to temporarily transfer my house into his name to protect the family property. He promised it was only paperwork and that everything would be transferred back once things settled down. I trusted him because he was my son. The lawyer he brought spoke fast. The documents were thick. My reading glasses were in my truck, and my son kept saying we were running late. "Just sign here, Dad." I did. The next week he changed the locks. Then he started charging me rent to live inside my own bedroom. When I refused, he served me eviction papers. I honestly thought it was some cruel misunderstanding. Surely no judge would believe a son would trick his own father like this. I was wrong. Every document carried my signature. Every page favored him. The judge had no reason to doubt it. I packed my clothes while my neighbors watched from across the street. Some looked embarrassed. Others couldn't even meet my eyes. As I picked up the last box, I heard music coming from inside the house. My son wasn't grieving what he'd done. He was planning a celebration. And what happened at that party would change both of our lives forever. I spent the next few nights sleeping in a cheap roadside motel about 20 minutes away. The room smelled like old carpet and bleach, and every night I stared at the ceiling wondering how my life had fallen apart so quickly. My wife had passed away 6 years earlier, and losing the house felt like losing the last piece of her. Every wall held a memory. Every corner reminded me of the family we used to be. Now someone else was laughing inside it. A few days later, one of my old neighbors called. He hesitated before speaking. "I thought you should know. Your son is throwing a huge party this Saturday. He's telling everyone he finally got rid of the old man." I didn't answer for several seconds. He continued. "People are saying he paid for the food, the band, and even fireworks with money he took out using the house." That sentence made my stomach turn. The next afternoon, I drove past the neighborhood. Cars filled both sides of the street. Bright lights covered the yard. A giant banner stretched across my garage that read, "New Beginning." The same garage where I had taught my son how to ride a bike. From across the street, I watched strangers carry coolers through my front door. I recognized family members too. My cousins, my nephew. Even people who knew exactly what had happened smiled as they walked inside. Not one of them called to ask if I was okay. Tell me honestly, if your own child did this to you, would you ever forgive them? Just as I was about to leave, I noticed something strange. A black sedan slowly pulled into the driveway, but didn't join the party. A man stepped out, looked at the house for a moment, then drove away without knocking. I recognized him immediately. It was my attorney. The same attorney I had hired years before to write my will. I hadn't spoken to him since before my son's divorce. Confused, I called his office first thing Monday morning. His assistant sounded surprised. "He was actually trying to reach you, Mr. Carter. He has something very important that needs to be discussed in person." My heart started racing. When I arrived at his office that afternoon, he didn't waste time. He placed a thick folder on his desk, looked me straight in the eyes, and quietly said, "I think your son celebrated far too early." He opened the folder to the very first page, and what I saw made me realize the story wasn't over. Not even close. My attorney slid the folder across the desk and folded his hands. "Before your wife passed away, she insisted on adding something to your estate plan. She never told your son about it. She told me to reveal it only if someone in the family ever tried to take advantage of you." I stared at him, barely breathing. He pulled out a copy of a trust agreement with my wife's signature beside mine. I remembered signing it years ago, but I had completely forgotten about it. Back then, she had said, "Just promise me you'll trust our lawyer if anything ever happens." I never asked why. My attorney pointed to one paragraph. Although the deed had been transferred into my son's name, the property itself had already been placed into an irrevocable family trust years earlier. The trust clearly stated that no beneficiary, including my son, could sell, refinance, borrow against, or permanently claim ownership of the house while I was alive. Any document signed afterward that conflicted with the trust could be challenged in court. I looked up in disbelief. So he doesn't actually own it. My attorney shook his head. He owns a piece of paper that doesn't give him the rights he thinks it does. For the first time in months, I felt hope. Then he handed me another document. My son had already borrowed hundreds of thousands of dollars against what he believed was his new property. He had used the money for expensive trucks, vacations, luxury furniture, and that massive party. The lenders had started asking questions after discovering the trust. Everything he had built his victory on was beginning to crumble. "We're filing emergency motions tomorrow morning," my attorney said. "And if the judge agrees, which I believe will happen, the celebration at your house may become the shortest victory party anyone has ever had." A week later, the hearing arrived. My son walked into court wearing an expensive suit and the same confident smile I'd seen on the day he threw me out. He barely looked at me. His lawyer argued that I had willingly signed everything. Then my attorney stood up. Without raising his voice, he placed the folder on the judge's bench. The courtroom fell silent as the judge slowly turned each page. My son's confidence began to disappear. His lawyer leaned over, whispering frantically into his ear. For the first time since this nightmare began, my son looked scared. And when the judge finally looked up from that folder, he said 7 words that changed everything. The judge looked directly at my son and calmly said, "This court recognizes the family trust as controlling." The room went completely silent. My son's face turned pale. Just days earlier, he'd been celebrating in what he thought was his forever home. Now he could barely keep his hands from shaking. The judge ruled that the deed transfer had no legal effect against the trust. The loans my son had taken using the property were now his responsibility alone. He had misrepresented his authority to lenders, and every financial decision he'd made based on that false claim was about to come crashing down. Outside the courthouse, reporters weren't waiting. There were no cameras, just a father standing in the parking lot, trying to understand how justice could feel so quiet. A month later, I walked back through my own front door. The music was gone. The decorations were gone. The expensive furniture my son had bought with borrowed money had already been taken away by creditors. The house felt empty, but it was finally peaceful again. I found one thing that nobody had touched, a framed picture of my late wife sitting on the fireplace mantel. I picked it up, wiped away the dust, and whispered, "You protected me one last time." A few weeks later, my son asked to meet me. He looked nothing like the man who had thrown me out. The confidence was gone. His truck had been repossessed. His friends had disappeared. The people who laughed with him at that party weren't answering his calls anymore. He looked at the ground and quietly said, "Dad, I'm sorry." For a long moment, I didn't speak. I had imagined this moment 100 times. I thought hearing those words would erase the pain. They didn't. I told him, "I forgive you because I don't want to carry this anger for the rest of my life." But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Trust isn't rebuilt with words. It's rebuilt with years of honest actions. Tears filled his eyes, but he nodded because he knew I was right. We still speak from time to time. Our relationship will never be what it once was, and maybe that's the price both of us have to live with. As for me, I changed my estate plan. Every decision is now protected by safeguards that make sure no one can ever manipulate me again. I also started volunteering at a local senior center, warning others never to sign documents they don't fully understand, even when they're handed to them by family. Looking back, I didn't lose because my son betrayed me. I would have lost if I had let bitterness become the rest of my story. The greatest inheritance we leave our children isn't a house or money. It's the values we hope they'll choose to live by. So let me ask you this. If you were in my place, would you have forgiven your son, or would you have walked away forever? Share your answer in the comments because I'd truly like to hear your perspective. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes family should be built on trust, not greed. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Family Betrayal for more unforgettable stories that remind us the truth always has a way of finding its way home.